千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. So chapter 17, let's see what it says. 17, the highest rulers, people do not know they have them. The next level, people love them and praise them. The next level, people fear them. The next level, people despise them. If the ruler's trust is insufficient, have no trust in them. Proceeding calmly, valuing their words, task accomplished, matter settled, the people all say, we did it naturally. Okay. So let's do a little bit of analysis before we take our mid-meeting break. So look at the first few lines, and it should be easy to see that we have repeating characters from 2 to 4. That's not all that's being repeated. We've got the last character of the 4 lines being exactly the same character, even though these lines are different lengths. 1 and 2 are the same, and then 3 and 4 are the same. So that gives us a pretty good clue that we have a section there. That's our first section. And it's logical, it makes sense that the first 4 lines depict the 4 levels of leadership in the Tao. There's the highest level that people don't even know about. There's the second highest, which is the leadership, the ruler that people love and praise. And then at the lower levels, we've got a level that people fear, the tyrants. And then we have the lowest level that people despise. That is not even fear anymore, but just loathing, just an extreme dislike because of usually foolishness, incompetence, lack of ability. So that makes sense that we have the 4 lines as the 4 levels, so we'll dig into that deeply. Then let's take a look at what follows. In 5 and 6, we have a pattern there. We've got the second and the last characters repeating, so we can tell that there's another section there. Now, because it's a short section, only 2 lines, it's sometimes just grouped with everything else, below, so that 5 and 9 would form like the second half. I'm just being a little more detailed here because in terms of meaning, the second section there, the middle section, is about the relationship between the rulers and the subjects. Or, if you prefer, in the modern world, those who lead and those who follow. That relationship has to be built on trust. If the trust is insufficient, it actually goes both ways. That is, those who lead don't trust those who are being led, while vice versa, the followers don't trust the leader either. And pretty soon, that endeavor breaks apart. So lastly, 7, 8, and 9, we have the final section, which is about the people. The people proceeding calmly, valuing their words, they accomplish tasks, they settle matters, and then they say, well, it was us. We did it naturally. We did it all on our own. And this gives us a clue what it means to have the highest rulers that people don't even know are there. So we're going to tackle that in the next slide when we come back from our break. So next stop, we're gonna decipher that first line, break it down line by line, character by character, and talk about the deeper meaning below the surface. Let's begin with the first two characters in Tao Te Ching, chapter 17. 拼音太上. What does that mean? Well, break it down character by character. Literally, the first character is supreme, the second character is above. So supreme above, that means the highest level. So a couple of things to note. One of them you see already there in my slide. This 太上, the highest rulers, this is not gender specific. It's not the highest level of kings. It's the highest level of rulers, gender neutral. So it may be surprising to some, but in Chinese culture, historically, there hasn't been, this stereotypical oppression of women that they could not rule. In fact, women wield power today in Chinese culture, whether you're talking about mainland China or perhaps Taiwan, where I'm from. Very common to see women assume leadership. There's no assumption that they are unfit to rule. So there is already a female president in Taiwan who's the current president. So in that respect, they're actually a little bit ahead of us here in the United States. So in the Tao, the abilities of women are well recognized. There's this particular line speaks to leaders of either gender. You can be a man or woman and be able to lead. And the context of that leadership can vary. It's not just necessarily ruling a kingdom, an empire, or a nation. It can also be leadership within the community, within the family, at the workplace, social circle, etc. Another note about 太上 is that this is a generic term to talk about the highest level. In this case, contextually, it applies to rulers, but in another usage, 太上老君, it is used to describe in religious Taoist terms the highest place occupied by Lao Tzu. So the name Lao Tzu, the old master, has been replaced with Lao Jun, which is the elder lord or elder ruler, and then 太上, the highest. So that's his other title, 太上老君, but that's specifically in a religious Taoist context. Okay, so now that you know about 太上, let's keep going. So what about the highest level? Well, we're followed by this line, 不知有之, which literally is not know that we have them. Why is that you not even know that you have them? Well, this transcendental leadership at the highest level of the Tao is so smooth and seamless that it feels completely natural to everyone. Now, traditionally, this has been one of the most difficult lines to clarify and make it really easy to grasp for people. That is partially because in our world, we don't really have great examples of people who practice that transcendental level of leadership. Leadership that seems so natural that people don't even people are not even actively aware of it. So that makes it really tricky to explain. However, I do have a way to make it super clear. My guarantee, as always, is that I promise by the end of our time together on chapter 17 that this particular line that may seem puzzling before, highest rulers, people don't even know they have them. I guarantee it'll be crystal clear, and you will be able to apply that as a very useful idea in your own life. All right, let's keep going. So first, let's be clear about why such leadership is unknown. It's unknown, unseen by most, not due to contrivance. What I mean by contrivance is that the highest level of rulers, they don't purposely, intentionally go out of their way to escape notice, to be invisible. They don't contrive to be unknown. They don't contrive to be unseen. They don't sneak around doing good stuff to benefit everybody. They are unknown or unseen because truly wise rulers feel no need to draw attention to their actions. So when they act in a way that is very smooth and seamless and natural, people tend not to notice. It's only those who have been trained in the Tao, who understand how this works, those are the ones that can see it. So let me give you a little bit more. There's another way to understand this concept that the highest level of leadership, people don't even know they have them. You can understand it from its opposite. The opposite will be leaders who contrive to be seen. They want to be seen. And that is mostly to gratify the ego. And that's, of course, contrary to the Tao. So this is the ego-driven kind of leadership that wants to be highly visible, high profile, be seen by everybody, to perceive their presence and greatness. So at the very opposite end, we have the Tao at the highest level. You know, it's completely different, diametrically opposite to the ego-driven leaders. So that's another way to try to understand it. Now, I want to wrap it all up in this concept called seamless leadership. So this can manifest in a couple of different ways, depending on people being aware or not aware that there's someone in that leadership position. So the first one, this is the one that people have trouble explaining, the unknown leader. Most people may not see the leader as a leader at all. They may only see someone who helps, enables, coordinates, or perhaps someone who supports them, someone who organizes for them. So this is the unknown leader. Now, an easier way, so the unknown leaders is exactly what line 1 is talking about, the highest ruler. There's another way to kind of get closer to an understanding of the unknown leader, and that's unknown actions. That is, even when people perceive the leader, that they know they have a leader, they know they have a ruler, like the king or emperor, or perhaps a business leader, even when they know that there's someone who's leading the way, they may not always be able to perceive the seamless actions taken by the leader. That depends on the level of wisdom that the leader has. If the leader is truly wise, someone who's not out to grab the limelight, someone who doesn't need the spotlight for ego-driven reasons, then it's possible that this particular leader, although being seen as a leader, will not need to highlight themselves. And therefore, what they do can escape the notice of most people. So that I do have a story to illustrate, to make it clear. It comes from my book, The Tao of Success. So there's a chapter in there called The Blanket. It's part of a section that speaks to one's relationship with others. And as I mentioned at the beginning, when it comes to leadership, those who lead and those who follow, it's about trust. It's about relationship that is established, or in some cases, destroyed between the two, depending on whether the leadership is positive or negative. So specifically, this particular story, I want to explain what it looks like to undertake an action that is seamless, that can escape the attention of most people. So specifically, I talk about seamless compassion. So this story comes to us from ancient China, that once upon a time in ancient China, there was an emperor who was known as a great ruler. One day, it was time for him to visit a distant temple for the winter ritual. So the imperial guards assembled outside the palace for his departure. The emperor's most trusted minister came out of the palace first. He greeted the commander in charge of the imperial guards assembled outside. He said, "Good morning, Captain. I see your men are ready." "Yes, sir," the captain saluted to the minister. The captain said, "Our most elite warriors will accompany His Majesty to the temple for the winter ritual. I only wish I am allowed to go with him to make certain of His Majesty's safety." At this, the minister laughed. "At ease, Captain. Peace prevails in the land, and we have no dangerous enemies. To tell you the truth, I'm actually more concerned about this cold winter." "The same thought crossed my mind, sir," the captain said. "Although His Majesty's carriage is very well appointed, it will still be freezing out there as they travel across the land on a day like this. They will be moving at such high speeds that the wind will seep in from the outside and make the carriage uncomfortably cold." The minister nodded at this and said, "You are quite correct. That is why I have instructed the head servant to prepare a warm blanket in the carriage. It will make the trip much easier and much more comfortable for His Majesty." It was exactly at that moment that the emperor emerged, coming out of the palace. The minister, the captain, and the guards all dropped to their knees. The emperor acknowledged everyone, and they all rose up in unison. Then the emperor approached the minister. He asked, "I trust all is in a state of readiness?" The minister responded, "Yes, Your Majesty. Everything is already set for departure." "Excellent." So the emperor turned and started to climb into the carriage. And then he seemed to recall something. He climbed back down. He said to the minister, "There's one thing I wanted to ask you. Yesterday, when you gave your report on the flooding in the Guangdong province, we didn't have time to go into the details. So tell me, how many families were displaced by the floods?" The minister replied, "Just over 200 families, Your Majesty." "I see," the emperor said. "So what actions had the regional authorities taken for disaster relief?" The minister replied, "Your Majesty, the Guangdong governor reported that about half of the affected people were able to stay with their relatives. For the other half, he was able to accommodate them in temporary shelters." So their discussion continued. As this was going on, the captain noticed the head servant in the palace running out of the palace with the blanket in his hands and a panicked expression on his face. He ran out, ran to the carriage, put the blanket in it in hasty fashion, and then stood by the carriage with his eyes downcast, not daring to move an inch. Immediately, the captain realized that the servant must have failed to prepare the blanket in advance. This was a lapse of great dishonor because one had to be completely impeccable in serving the emperor. The captain was shocked, but remained silent because none could speak in the presence of the emperor without permission. Speaking of the emperor, he was finishing up his discussion with the minister. He said, "Next time, if I forget to ask you about the details regarding such disasters, I want you to remind me." "I shall indeed, Your Majesty." The minister bowed deeply as the emperor turned and climbed into the carriage. The captain gave a signal, and the mounted guardsmen led the carriage away from the palace. Gradually, their speed increased. After a while, they disappeared over the horizon. Upon this, the captain felt he could no longer contain his silence. He turned to the minister. "Sir, the head servant, he..." The minister cut him off. "Yes, Captain. I saw the whole thing. I know what happened." So the captain said, "Shall I arrest him, sir, for negligence?" The captain's hand went to his sword. "No, Captain," the minister shook his head. "It is His Majesty's wish to spare this man." "What?" The captain was confused, but His Majesty did not even notice that the blanket was missing. "Well," the minister said, "that is exactly what he would say if you and I were to bring up the matter." The minister explained, "You can stake your life on the fact that he did notice. He also knew that if he said anything about this lapse, imperial tradition would compel the severe actions be taken against the servants for dereliction of duty." The captain was beginning to understand. "So that is why His Majesty pretended not to notice and then stalled for time, discuss a few things with you just to give the servants a chance to remedy the error." "Precisely," the minister said. There was admiration in his eyes. Our emperor not only forgave this man, but did so in the most seamless way possible at the time. So that's the end of the story. And that's an example of what I call seamless compassion. It's seamless in this context, meaning that it's an action that is so smooth and graceful that the vast majority of the people are not even likely to be aware of them. Only those who know the Tao will be able to sense that changes have taken place. In the story, this is represented by the minister, who not only observed, but understood. The captain represented the level where most people are. He needed to have things pointed out and explained to him. So, one thing to learn from the story is to incorporate similar seamless actions in our own lives. So I have some suggestions on how we can do that. So in our lives, We know that there's going to be triggering events from time to time. What I mean by that is things that set you off. In the story, it was the realization that the head servant had neglected his duties to bring out the blanket. In your life, the triggering event may be an offense, a mistake, a failure on someone's part to keep a promise, somebody letting you down, basically. So then the question becomes, well, how do you react? Whether you are in a leadership position or not, you can practice seamless compassion. And from the Tao perspective, one would argue that you are always in a leadership position one way or another, from one perspective or another. You are leading other people or you are leading yourself. So there's a triggering event. What's next? Well, like the emperor, what you want to do is to maintain your composure. Remain cool and collected. Don't let the triggering event rattle you. It's not that bad. It's something that you can deal with from a cool and collected mindset. Then you want to recall to mind that you can be considerate in any situation. This stems from the realization that nobody is perfect, people are not perfect. They do the best they can with what they have. And it's the same with us. We're always doing the best we can with what we have. So the fact that the triggering events occurred may mean that they don't have enough. They don't have enough, so they can only do the best with what is insufficient. So you want to be considerate of that and not immediately fly off the handle. Then you want to practice detachment, realizing that there's no need to take offense. There's no need to get angry, feel upset. This comes from the realization that those emotions rarely improve the situation. There is a time and place for anger, for emotional upset. But in most circumstances, as we interact with other people in daily life, we find that again and again that those strong emotions don't really help anyone, don't really help anything. Lastly, there's a realization that there's no need to forgive in the conventional sense. Simply let it go if and when it is appropriate to do so. That last line is actually important. When there's a lapse, when there's negligence, a dereliction of duty, there's an appropriate response. It may be something that you're responsible for. It may be something that you don't want to see repeated. So there's going to be an appropriate response, which may include more than just seamless compassion. It may indeed be the most compassionate thing that you can do to help the other person correct that problem, taking a much more active role than the emperor did in the story. But then there's also going to be situations where you already know that the other person fully realizes what had occurred, and on their own initiative will make sure that it doesn't happen again. If that is the case, then it's time to cut them some slack. So the greatest leaders understand seamless compassion and understand how to apply that seamless compassion in an appropriate way. It is not encouraging incompetence. It is not encouraging negligence. It is to react in the way that is best for everyone going forward. So let's continue on with this concept. We can further understand the highest level of leadership by looking at the lower levels. In line 2, we have these two characters here that I am isolating and explaining. So the pinyin for this one is going to be tricky. This particular expression happens to hit the weakest part of the pinyin system. So looking at this as a native English speaker, you may say kui si. No, it's not that in Chinese. It sounds like qi ci. So qi ci is actually written this way in pinyin. As I said, remember that academics and scholars, they're human too. They are people too. They do the best they can with what they have, and sometimes what they have is not enough. So that is why the systems they invent are also imperfect, just as human beings are. So this is one instance where we see definitely a problem that makes pinyin more difficult than it has to be. So the sound is qi ci. So literally, we have two characters. It's next. And what it means is it's next lower level. Literally, it's next lower level. And translated, in my translation, I render it as the next level. Rather than to be explicit and say the next level down, because that's not in the original, and I think people understand that it's the next level down because the first line is about the highest level. So the next level down, let's talk about that. It's the next level below the previous one, qi ci. It's next level down. So what about that next level? Well, this is the level that we know. This is the level where we can actually use a lot of examples that everybody knows about, the great leaders that we have throughout history, the leaders who are widely loved and admired. That's the next level that we all know about. As you saw in the example of the emperor and the blanket, the level 2 leaders, level 2 rulers may still act in seamless ways. It's just that for the most part, people are quite aware of the active leadership. So, example, the people in the story, the minister, the captain, the guards, indeed the subjects of the ancient Chinese empire, they are all quite aware of the presence of the emperor. So he would not be the unknown, seamless leader. He would be a leader who is known but takes seamless actions. So I hope you understand that distinction. And it's now time to talk about this next level, this level 2 that people are aware of. So all the books that you see out there that talk about leadership, all the books that are in the marketplace to talk about elements of great leadership are all focusing on what to Lao Tzu would be the next best level, level 2. Now, the ancient Chinese certainly were aware of that level 2 leadership as well, and they themselves also have ideas on how one can accomplish that level. One can practice leadership at that level. What does it mean to be a level that people will respect, admire, love? What would it mean to be effective at that level? To illustrate that, I have another quick story for you, this one from a different book. The Tao of Happiness is focusing on Zhuangzi. So Zhuangzi spoke of these issues, including leadership, using stories to illustrate his point. So when he wanted to talk about what it means to be a great leader, a visible leader who people respect and love, there's a certain Tao of leadership there as well. So what does that look like? What does that mean? Well, the story he wrote was about a bandit. So from this book, The Tao of Happiness, there's a story from Zhuangzi that once upon a time in ancient China, there was a notorious bandit by the name of Zi, who led a group of outlaws. One day, one of his men asked him, "Hey boss, do we bandits have the Tao?" The other bandits thought this might be a joke, but Zi answered seriously. He said, "Absolutely. How can we not follow the principles of the Tao? In fact, there are 5 principles that are especially important." So the men, all the bandits, wanted to know what the 5 principles were. So Zi listed them one by one. He said, first, a bandit has to be able to figure out where people hide their treasure. This is the principle of insight, being able to see what others cannot. So of course, all the bandits are like, "Oh yeah, right, of course, yeah, we need to figure out that stuff. People hide their treasures in different places. We need to figure it out." So this was easy to understand. Then Zi said, a bandit has to be willing to go into a heavily guarded mansion first. This is the principle of courage, leading the way with bravery and determination. And again, all the bandits were nodding their heads. Of course, this is what they expected from someone who would lead them. Then, Zi continued, a bandit also has to be willing to cover everyone's exit by being the last to leave. This is the principle of loyalty, sacrificing one's safety to protect one's fellows. Makes sense. First in, last out. Then Zi said, a bandit has to be able to evaluate a situation in terms of danger, safety, failure, and success. This is the principle of discernment, the ability to think clearly and judge wisely. Lastly, he said, a bandit has to make sure everyone gets an equal share of the loot. This is the principle of fairness, so no one will be left out. These 5 principles, insight, courage, loyalty, discernment, and fairness, are the Tao of the bandit. If you do not have all 5, it will be impossible for you to become a great bandit. So at that, the bandits realized that there was a lot more to banditry than they first thought, than they first imagined. And now the question for everybody. Do you think that Zhuangzi was actually teaching people how to excel as bandits? It's kind of a rhetorical question. And I think, as you would probably expect, the answer is no. Zhuangzi was not writing a manual on how to be a bandit. He chose to tell this particular story in this particular fashion. Why? Well, it was for dramatic effects, to catch attention, to have a captivating story that, hey, even bandits, can follow the Tao. So it's to basically highlight the universal nature of his message. If the Tao can apply to bandits, then, well, yeah, you can be pretty sure it would apply to you. It would apply to all other aspects of life as well. Now, last time I mentioned that when we talk about the Tao of leadership, it's not just for people who aspire to become great leaders. Even if you don't have this kind of aspiration, this discussion can be very helpful because the 5 principles can help you evaluate the leaders you come across. You can identify which ones are closest to the Tao. So let me go through them with you. So number 1 is, as you will probably recall, is insight, to be insightful by looking farther and deeper. So just so you understand the overall context, this is about strategic thinking. This is about looking further ahead, knowing what to do next in terms of your overall direction, a vision for the future, if you will. So this is about planning. This is about knowing what to plan. So strategic thinking. Then we have courage. Lead by personal example rather than words. So we know that those who talk more than they do are not going to succeed as leaders. They may succeed as critics, but not as leaders. So great leaders have to also take action in a proactive way and be willing to do what they ask other people to do. And this is what gives their delegation its authority, that they can do it, but they trust you to do it. So lead by personal example. And remember, in the story, this is expressed as first in, first to go in. In our world, we might say, first to be proactive in a particular initiative, leading by example. And then loyalty, this is the last out, first in, last out. This is the part where you take care of your team. If you take care of your team, then your team will take care of you because you have to offer your loyalty to the team first. That team loyalty is a powerful force in any enterprise. So great leaders are the ones that know how to harness and direct this energy. Then we have discernment, the ability to evaluate and assess the situation. So some not understanding the original may say that, well, that's just another way to say insight. Well, as I mentioned, insight is more about strategic thinking, planning, direction for the future. Discernment is about the tactical, what to do in any given situation. So in the life of a bandit, you can imagine that there's some planning that goes into a heist before that heist takes place. And then once you're actually engaged in doing the tasks to further the success of the heist, there's going to be all kinds of things that come up. And then you're going to need to be able to evaluate and assess the situation. This is tactical thinking as opposed to strategic thinking. Lastly, when everybody's out, everybody is back in the lair, with the goods, with the result of the heist, then it's time to split it up. So you got to be fair, got to be equitable, no playing favorites. There's nothing that damages a team faster than a leader who plays favorites. So that leader makes sure everyone is carrying their own weight as far as doing their own share of work. No one is allowed to slack off. And eventually, when victory is at hand, great leaders make sure that everybody in the team benefits equally. Nobody's left out. So these are the 5 principles that benefit, that go toward great leadership. The universal nature of the Tao means these are the same 5 principles we should follow in every aspect of life. That has to do with group dynamics. So it's not just business, it's not just banditry, pulling off a heist. No, it's not about that. This is more universal than that. So whether you are interacting with family, friends, neighbors, or community, you may find yourself in a situation where people are looking to you for direction, even if you do not wish to take on that responsibility. So as we look around at one another, here in this gathering, let's all take a moment to acknowledge everybody else that is in the meeting with us. We're all fellow travelers, sharing the same path for the moment, at least until the next stop. So you may be, as we traverse this path from one moment to the next, there's going to be times when you are ahead of the pack, blazing a trail, showing everybody the way. When that happens, whether it's here online or in real life, I want you to think of Z the Bandits and look at these 5 things: insight, courage, loyalty, discernment, fairness. Use them to guide you into the Tao of leadership. So we've talked about the leadership that we can all respect and admire and love and praise. It's all about the yin and yang in the Tao. So with the good, there's also the negative. There's also the lower levels of leadership. Leadership that is bad, sometimes horrible. So those can likewise be divided into 2 levels, just as high level can be divided into 2. Same here. So let's take a look at line 3. 其次, same expression. The next level down is what it means. The next level, people fear them. Let's take a closer look. Next level down is the ruler people fear. This level is characterized by tyrannical oppression and ruthless elimination of opponents. So you can imagine sort of a Game of Thrones type of conflict within the court. A lot of plotting, scheming, backstabbing, all kinds of power plays and power struggles. So the tyrannical oppression that people fear, the ruthless elimination. So this is the ruler that people do not love. In our modern world, the equivalent may be a boss or manager who uses bullying tactics, intimidation, anger, and aggression in the workplace. Now, I've seen examples like that in my own life, and I think you probably have as well. So consider the commonality. Whether it's the imperial setting, with the emperor or maybe a king in a kingdom, or perhaps the workplace with the manager and the boss, the commonality, regardless of setting, is that people will be glad to leave such a leader behind. So if a tyrannical ruler was to pass away or be ousted in a coup, if an awful boss or a manager was to be replaced, was to be fired and is no more, people will be glad, people will celebrate. Now, more likely than not, a lot of times the common scenario is that people will look for a chance to leave that dysfunctional, negative workplace and go work somewhere else. They will be glad to leave that setting behind because of that particular manager or boss. So that's the commonality, regardless of setting, whether at the national, kingdom, imperial level, or today in the business setting, in the community, etc. Now let's talk about the lowest level of this hierarchy. At the lowest level is someone who has somehow come into power, but is obviously unfit to lead, unfit to rule. So what happens when that is the case? This leadership, or the lack thereof, usually characterized by stupidity and incompetence, ineffectiveness. Thus, people react with loathing, disdain, and hatred. Now, when we explain the different levels of the hierarchy in the Tao in this fashion, it's by necessity, broad strokes, generalizations. We always need to reference the real world. In the real world, what we find is that the loathing, disdain, and hatred won't necessarily be universal. It isn't that everyone will loathe or disdain or hate the awful manager or the awful boss. What may be surprising is that such a leader will still have supporters. Why? Because there will never be a shortage of sycophants hoping to gain power and benefit through proximity to authority. That always happens. It's perhaps part of human nature. Throughout history, time and time again, we see that this is always the case, that bad leadership, while alienating most people hate it or fear it. At the same time, there's always going to be a small group, a minority in most cases, that will still cling to that tyrant or the incompetent ruler, the incompetent leader. Always happens. Next, now that we're done with the 4 levels, the hierarchy of leadership in the Tao, let's get into line 5 and 6, which are going to be about trust. Line 5, 4 characters, so we can break them down easily. First character, 信. It can mean belief, faith, or trust. So in this context, it's definitely trust. The next character, know or not. The third character, that is the character that you have already seen in this particular context. It's the character, the meaning of the character is enough or sufficient. The last character requires a little more explanation. It's one of the many characters that in ancient Chinese or classical Chinese that served the same function as modern-day punctuation. In this particular case, it's period. And when I say period, you know that we sometimes do the same thing in English, that we use a word like period when we talk in place of punctuation. And that's because we usually don't say punctuation, We don't say, comma, and then something else, comma, semicolon, or semicolon, and then another group of items. We usually don't say that, but there's going to be times when you or I will say, I'm not going to go, period. You say period, quote unquote, instead of just ending the sentence there because you wanted to emphasize that you wanted to emphasize that statement. In this case, to not go. So in the ancient Chinese, that's always the case. There were many characters that were being used to end a particular sentence. All right, so let's take a look at this line that's translated as if the ruler's trust is insufficient. That is referring to a ruler or boss or manager, a leader who does not trust the team, the process, or people in general. So here I'm making a distinction between team and people. Well, of course, teams are composed by people. When I say team, so if you think about a workplace, a business, if you work at such a business, the team would be the direct report, people who report to a particular manager, let's say. So that group may be a department reporting to that manager. Perhaps the manager, being a control freak, does not have trust in his team. So that's the context. And when I say people in general, that is more widely encompassing. It's not just the team or the department, it's also the people that they interact with, which may be customers, maybe consultants, maybe vendors. So the lack of trust manifests in all of those different scenarios. So most often in the modern world, we see this as the micromanager, the control freak, the backseat driver in the workplace. Do you know someone like that? I definitely do. So micromanagement is bureaucratic and a waste of time. Probably I don't need to convince anyone of that. It is often a symptom of ego and or fear. So let's dig into this a little bit. I want to highlight this modern term, micromanagement, and then I want to illustrate how it is diametrically opposite to the Tao. And that's probably all the time we're going to have today. There's a lot more to talk about in this chapter. We'll finish it up next time. But for now, though, let's focus on the micromanager. So think about the micromanager. How can you recognize someone to be a micromanager? Well, the very first thing that I notice is that the micromanager is usually a workaholic in the most negative way. So there are people who are workaholics in a positive way, that in the sense that they are diligent and disciplined. But the workaholic in the most negative way, what I mean by that is someone who works hard at the expense of everything else, including health, family, relationships. So not only is this person working really hard, but this person is constantly complaining about being overworked, being tired, having no time. Well, the workaholism is only because such micromanagers refuse to delegate. So in a sense, in a real sense, they have created that situation for themselves where they are so overworked as to be tired and have no time. This is contrary to the Tao, because the Tao is about the work-life balance, finding a balance in everything, including work. Another characteristic of the micromanager is this person hoards knowledge, access, and resources. Why do they do that? Well, these are the ways for the micromanager to maintain control. Keep in mind, in this particular context of this chapter of the Tao Te Ching, when I talk about micromanagers, I'm talking about the lower levels of leadership in a hierarchy. So in the chapter, it will be lines 3 and 4 that talk about that. So the reason why they want to maintain control by hoarding knowledge, access, and resources is to force people to go through them whenever they need any of those things. A particular resource, go through them. Particular access, you have to go through them. So this is contrary to the Tao, because the Tao is about sharing, mentoring, and guiding. Next, I find that the micromanager makes things complicated, whereas the Tao is the opposite, streamlines and simplifies. So for instance, micromanagers, bad leaders, they want to approve or maintain their veto power to every little thing. On big things, everyone can recognize the necessity for the manager to take responsibility, to buy into that. But when it gets ridiculous, would be when that same approval is required for every petty, trivial little thing. It slows things down, it creates bottlenecks. So next, number 4 out of a total of 5 is that a favorite expression from the micromanager is, why wasn't I told? Why did no one tell me about this? Well, another one is, well, who told you that? When the micromanager says, why wasn't I told? It's usually because of 1, 2, and 3, that people don't want to make things more complicated, so they bypass the micromanager. And who told you that is when the micromanager wants to point fingers and accuse. It's contrary to the Tao, because the Tao is about fostering, promoting, encouraging independence and self-sufficiency. Lastly, high turnover. People take off, they leave whenever they can. Now, that's contrary to the Tao, because the Tao is about building relationships, strengthening relationships. So the micromanager is a way for us to gain a view into how the bad leaders get horrible. And as I said, that's about all the time that we have for today. Next time, we'll pick it up from here and go beyond the issue of trust to talk about what happens when people have inspired leadership. For now, let me sum it up by sharing with everyone this breakdown into the 2 big headings, low-level leadership and high-level leadership. So the lowest level, level 1, characterized by hatred and disdain. So stupid, so incompetent, doesn't make any sense. That's what we're talking about. Level 2, a level above that, perhaps a leader who at least isn't stupid, but is tyrannical, egocentric, and therefore people react with hatred and fear. You are afraid of what this particular leader will do, and you dislike the negativity that surrounds the team, the workplace. Now let's take a look at high-level leadership that we have talked about. Level 3, characterized by love and respect. This is the leader that we know are great leaders that we have read about in school. So look at the difference. Level 1 and level 2 are united by hatred. Level 3, it's about love. So throughout history, we have many examples of leaders that have commanded love and respect. And each leader is going to have some detractors, but the vast majority of the people will look upon such leadership with positive feelings. Level 4 is going to be the focus of our next talk together. Next Sunday, I'm going to talk about level 4. It's characterized by love and seamless oneness. I realize that the expression seamless oneness is still a little bit fuzzy, still a little bit nebulous right now. That's okay. Next time, as I said, I will make sure everyone gets crystal clarity. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.